Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about none other than Sweet Dreams Jamahal Hill. He is a controversial fighter who you either love or you hate. A man you want to see win or a man you want to see lose. A man who has won the belt in spectacular fashion but has also been knocked out in the first round on the championship stage. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a deep dive into the career Sweet Dreams Jamahal Hill. Born in Chicago, May 19th, 1991, he would spend the first 12 years of his life in Chicago, but he would move to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he currently trains out of. Jamahal currently has 6 kids, ranging from 2 years old all the way up to 14. So it goes without saying that Jamahal Hill needs a lot of money to put that food on the table. And if you look at Jamahal's physique, he's not missing any meals. Jamahal Hill's original passion was not MMA, or any combat sport for that matter, unless you count street fighting. But his original passion would be basketball, and he was doing very well at it, but the older he got, the less he was motivated to pursue it into the NBA. And when he hit college level, he'd become jaded and no longer pursue basketball. So naturally he would go to MMA to scratch that athletic itch. And it was a healthy way to get out some anger and frustration and just stress in general, rather than fighting in the streets, getting arrested, and getting a rap sheet for something silly. He could do that in the gym. And seemingly, he took to it like a fish in water. And in 2016, Jamahal Hill would dip his toes into the MMA world, having his first amateur fight, and his only amateur fight, against Dylan Acne. And Jamahal Hill would knock Acne out just 3 minutes into the second round. After gaining the confidence and knocking somebody out in the octagon instead of the streets, Jamahal Hill would fight Alex Davidson in his professional debut in September of 2017. This fight, however, would not go the way his last fight did. This would end up going all the way to the judges, and Jamahal Hill would win by unanimous decision. With a crazy amount of confidence, Jamahal Hill would go into his next fight against Mike Johnson in December of that same year. And this fight would not go the same as his last, because just 4 minutes and 45 seconds into the first round, Jamahal Hill would knock Mike out. After getting his first knockout on the professional stage, he would go into his third professional fight against William Vincent. This would be a much harder fight than anticipated, but Jamahal Hill was more than ready for it, because he would end up winning this fight by unanimous decision. After going 3-0, Jamahal Hill had a ton of confidence. He thought that this MMA thing could bring him all the fame and all the glory. And in his fourth fight, Jamahal Hill would fight for the light heavyweight belt against Daquan Townsend, a 19-7 experienced fighter, which was a tough task for a fighter only 3-0. But Jamahal Hill would turn out to be more than ready for this fight, because he would beat Townsend from pillar to post and end up winning all 5 rounds and getting his first belt wrapped around his waist. Jamahal Hill had 2 more fights scheduled, but they ended up being cancelled for one reason or another. So he would end up going to Lights Out Championship and fighting William Vincent for the second time. And Jamahal Hill would knock out Vincent in the first round, forcing Vincent into retirement. Jamahal Hill was gaining a lot of attention, and the UFC would be one of those paying attention, because they would offer him a fight on Dana White's Contender Series. And in July of 2019, he would make that walk, just 5-0, onto the big stage, a make or break moment. If you win, you get the UFC contract, and if you lose, you can kiss your UFC aspirations goodbye. And his opponent would be Alexander Popek, and Jamahal Hill would not disappoint, because in the second round, just 4 minutes in, he would win on the feet, and once the fight hit the mat, Jamahal Hill would rain vicious elbows, forcing the ref to step in and stop the fight. And with Dana White amazed that just a 5-0 fighter can beat a 9-2 fighter in that dominant of a fashion, he had no choice but to sign him. After being signed to the promotion, the natural next step would be to make his UFC debut. He would make that debut in January of 2020 against Darko Stosic. This would be a tough fight for both fighters, but Jamahal Hill was playing it smart and would land the bigger and better shots, eventually leading it to the judges. And Jamahal Hill would win by unanimous decision, Jamahal Hill would take his next fight in December of 2020 against Ovince St. Preux, otherwise known as OSP, a very experienced fighter who had fought for the belt in the past, and with a crazy record of 25 wins and 14 losses. Not crazy in the sense that he has been very dominant, but the man has been through the highest highs and the lowest lows. He was a tough test for any up-and-coming fighter. And remember, Jamahal Hill was only 7-0 at the time that he fought OSP, and Jamahal Hill would show that he was more than capable of beating a man at the caliber of OSP, because he would knock out OSP just 3 minutes and 37 seconds into the second round, impressing the UFC as well as the fans. With the light heavyweight division being very shallow at the time, not having many fighters on the come up, besides maybe 2 or 3 guys, Jamahal Hill being one, they would have Jamahal Hill be tested against a very good grappler in Paul Craig. Now Paul Craig has had a very up and down career. He loses against guys that he probably shouldn't lose to, but some of the wins he has are crazy. For example, Paul Craig has beaten Magomed Ankalaev, which if you don't know, Magomed Ankalaev is known as the dark horse in the division, but when Paul Craig fought him, it didn't look that way at all. But Paul Craig has also lost to Johnny Walker, so he's a very up and down guy. And this fight would turn out to be a Magomed Ankalaev performance, because just 2 minutes into the first round, Paul Craig would latch up a triangle choke and wrapped around Jamahal Hill's arm, dislocating his arm, which was disgusting to watch. Jamal's arm was just flopping like a wet noodle. Looked like it was broken, but luckily it was just a dislocation of the elbow. And Paul Craig would get the TKO win in the first round, not only beating a future champion, but also giving Jamahal Hill his first loss. After recovering from his brutal arm injury, Jamahal Hill would go into his next fight against another up-and-coming fighter at the time, who many thought might be the next title challenger, in Jimmy Crute. And in December of 2021, Jimmy Crute versus Jamahal Hill would take place. And Jamahal Hill would not disappoint, because just 48 seconds into the fight, Jamahal Hill would land a brutal right hook, sending Jimmy Crute tumbling into the canvas, being one of the nastiest knockouts in Jamahal Hill's career. And to top it off, Jamahal Hill would get that $50,000 performance bonus, not only getting a fat check, but gaining a ton of hype and a ton of fans in the process. And Jamahal Hill would go into his next fight with a ton of confidence, fighting none other than Johnny Walker, another very powerful fighter, but a very, very weak chin. Johnny Walker is the epitome of a glass cannon. The man can knock you out with one shot, but you can also knock him out with one shot. And Johnny Walker would get knocked out with an overhand right, sending Johnny Walker cartoonishly tumbling into the canvas, as Johnny Walker tends to do. He never gets knocked out in the way that you normally see. He always has this very spastic way of falling when he's unconscious. Why he does that, I'm not sure. He's just a goofy guy from head to toe. After getting a 3-minute knockout in the first round, Jamahal Hill would be rewarded yet again with a performance of the night. Jamahal Hill's next opponent would be Thiago Santos, much like OSP. This was a very experienced fighter. Thiago was 22-10, which isn't the best record, but he had fought in John Jones for the belt. He was a brutal striker with a ton of power, but after the John Jones fight, his knees were not the same ever again. But he is a tough challenge for any fighter because of his experience and his power, and this was truly a tough test for Jamahal Hill going into it. And on August 6th, 2022, they would face off and see who's the best. This was a competitive fight at first, but the longer it went on, the more dominant it was for Jamahal Hill. And in the 4th round, Jamahal Hill would bring brutal ground and pound, forcing the ref to step in and stop the fight. And this fight would be so entertaining that it would be awarded Fight of the Night, making this his 3rd fight in a row to get a bonus. Not only did he get a bonus, but he would be on the short list of fighters that you could toss in the title fight. Although it did seem like a very wishful dream to get a title fight after Thiago Santos. At the time, Alex Pereira wasn't in the division. John Jones had left the division. There really wasn't anybody else outside of waiting for Yuri Prohaska to come back. Magomed Ankalaev had just blown his title shot with Jan Blachowicz. So yeah, there really wasn't many people next up. So the UFC wanted to get Glover Teixeira, the champion at the time, an opponent that he could test himself with, because Glover Teixeira was a star. He had a ton of fans. You didn't want to shelf him because he was already in his 40s. So they would be generous and give Jamahal Hill the title shot. Jamahal Hill came into the championship fight with Glover with a ton of confidence that many fans thought was undeserved, because he was only 11-1 going up against Glover Teixeira, a decorated veteran of the sport. Because Glover Teixeira, at the time he fought Jamahal Hill, had 33 wins and 8 losses, and had fought for well over a decade at this point. But once the ref said fight, this fight would be an absolute barn burner. Glover Teixeira was landing hard shots, testing Jamahal Hill's chin and testing his heart, as well as his cardio. Both men came out of this fight battered, bruised, and were probably sore for the next month. But only one man can win once it hits the judges, and that man would be Jamahal Hill, going against the odds, shocking all the fans, and most likely the UFC alike. Jamahal Hill, in the span of 3 years, went from making his debut, being a no-name, to being the light heavyweight champion of the world. A feat rarely seen outside of the man he is fighting this weekend. And on top of getting the belt, he would get another Fight of the Night bonus, as well as getting the President's Choice Fight of the Year nominee with his Glover Teixeira fight. Jamahal Hill also would be awarded the Newcomer of the Year, Fighter of the Year, as well as the UFC award of Fight of the Year versus Glover Teixeira. So this fight was huge in more than a couple ways for Jamahal Hill. But Jamahal Hill's luck would end there, because Jamahal Hill would end up rupturing his Achilles tendon playing basketball with Daniel Cormier. But Jamahal Hill did the respectful thing and decided to relinquish the belt because he knew he would be out for a very lengthy period of time. And at the time, Jamahal Hill was loved by the majority of fans. He had a few haters here and there like all fighters do, but for the most part everybody liked Jamahal. He didn't waste any time in giving up the belt. He didn't hold on to the belt and not let anybody else get that feeling of being the champion. Plus, Jamahal Hill knew that once he comes back, he'll take that belt back. Or would he? And that question will be answered at UFC 300 up against Glover Teixeira's protege, Alex Poatan Pereira. Now this fight was extremely hyped up. The UFC 300 card was stacked to the bones, stacked to the gills, whatever you want to say. And to headline it all, to end the night, it was Pereira versus Hill. Jamahal Hill was extremely confident. He felt disrespected because everybody said that Alex Pereira was way too good for him. Like, Jamahal Hill didn't just prove to the world that he was good enough to be champion when he fought Glover. So Jamahal Hill came into this fight talking a crazy amount of trash, saying how he was going to knock out Pereira and rub it in everybody's faces. And this is when the fans started to turn on Jamahal Hill. Personally, I get it, he's trying to hype up the fight, hype himself up to a degree, get as many fans watching this fight as he possibly could. And once the ref said fight, Jamahal Hill and Alex Pereira would go at it. Now at first, Jamahal Hill was landing the most shots. He was landing calf kicks. He wasn't really throwing much hands, but he was picking his shots well. And Alex Pereira really wasn't checking any leg kicks. He did check one or two, but for the most part, Jamahal Hill did have a pretty solid game plan to start off the fight, but that quickly would turn around because just 3 minutes and 14 seconds into the fight, Jamahal Hill would land a low blow. Whether it was a low blow or not depends on who you ask. It would hit around the belt line, and it's hard to say. Hitting the belt line pushed Alex's cup up and made it uncomfortable and hurt him that way, but it wasn't a direct foot on the cup per se. But Alex Pereira would push Herb Dean away, and then he would follow up with a left hook, his signature shot, and knock Jamahal Hill out after he rained brutal ground and pound. And Jamahal Hill got finished legitimately for the first time in his career. Jamahal Hill ended up being embarrassed and resentful towards Alex after this fight. And this is the beginning of Jamahal Hill losing his marbles and turning all of his fans, or the majority of his fans, into haters. Because Jamahal Hill would come out with a bunch of excuses as to why he ended up getting knocked out, from Alex's team to Alex coming forward when Herb Dean was stepping in to break it up after the low blow. Jamahal Hill not actually being knocked out, that it was an early stoppage. Now a bunch of people are making fun of Jamahal. At this point, I do think that Jamahal Hill is playing it up because he's not really loved. He's not the babyface of the UFC anymore. He is more of the heel. And if you can't be loved, you gotta be hated. Because being hated is not the worst in the UFC. The worst thing is for the fans to not care. Because they don't care to see you in a title fight. They don't care to see you in your next fight. They don't care to see you win or lose. You do not want to be in that position. You either want to be the good guy or the bad guy. And Jamahal Hill has picked the bad guy as of today. And that brings us to this weekend. Jamahal Hill is facing off with Yuri Prochazka, a fight we probably would have seen fighting for the title just a few years ago, but due to injury, we are now seeing it a few years later. And I'm not complaining because this is going to be a banger of a fight. Jamahal Hill has knockout power. Jamahal Hill has much more traditional technique, while Yuri Prochazka is very herky-jerky, has the capabilities of just leaning into shots and making him that much more powerful. But with the herky-jerky style, you can catch your opponent off guard and do a lot of damage that way. So it really is a coin flip when it comes to that style. It is very fun to watch, but it can bite you pretty quick if you turn or you dip left when you should have dipped right. And Yuri also likes to have his hands down by his hips and not have them ready to block a shot. So that's not great, especially compared to Jamahal Hill, which Jamahal Hill doesn't have his hands up by his chin all the time either, but they are closer to his chin. And Yuri likes to dip down a lot, so if you throw the right shot at the right time, catching Yuri dipping down, then you can catch him with an uppercut or even like a shovel uppercut. So yeah, it really depends on who shows up on that night in the better shape and the better mindset. Right now I am leaning towards Jamahal Hill just because Yuri Prochazka hasn't shown that he's willing to change his style at all. I don't think he needs to completely redo it, but he does need to work on his defense, more specifically checking leg kicks and being more intelligent with where he puts his hands when he's fighting. But that's a hard thing to really hammer into somebody's head when they're this deep into their career. But realistically, Jamahal Hill could, like I said, knock out Yuri Prochazka, but Yuri Prochazka could also land a crazy shot on Jamahal's chin and drop him and land follow-up shots and get him out of there. And I think this fight will end probably in the 3rd or the 4th round, but I do think it has a pretty good chance at being fight of the night in my opinion. Let me know who you have winning this fight and how you see them winning. If you guys watched the video this far, be sure to like and subscribe, as it is the only way to support the channel. I hope you guys have a great week and enjoy the fights this weekend. Bye.